thing I've always found really fascinating in sports in general, but it crosses over into esports and anything that's like highly competitive, is seeing the kind of winning mentality of the greatest players. Because there is a distinct difference in the mentality between someone who wins a lot, and someone who just seems to win almost by force of will, not just good play, not just being in a period when things suit them and getting the right sort of opponent, but it feels like anyone they face, they can find a way to win. They can find a way to play, if not their best, to get the most out of themselves. To get, if they can only play 70% that day, they play fully to 70%. They find enough within the 70% to be able to overcome the opponent no matter who he is. That sort of mentality of the greatest players is so interesting, because seeing the disparity between them and another player who is great but not the same greatness and not the same greediness, seeing a player who's just good, and obviously seeing players who are very good and make it to a lot of finals and maybe they lose. Seeing these differences is kind of what kind of helps us define and look at the outlines and start to see what this winning mentality is and where it comes from. So first of all, a defining quality of this winning mentality of the greatest players ever is this notion that you're going to leave nothing up to chance. Now, what I mean by that is, I used to say it like this about the greatest players, okay? A very good player, sometimes even a great player, wins often the first time they'll win often, because it's early in their development, is when everything suits them. Like, it's the meta that suits them in terms of games like League of Legends or whatever, in terms of literally that style, or more so in terms of meta, in terms of the opponents that they're sort of facing, the style that they play and the style that their opponents play, how that matches up. When it's in a favorable scenario, like our style doesn't really have a proper counter, or the other teams who have enough skill and are at our level can't properly counter it or execute, or maybe are even exactly the wrong style for ours, and so we supersede them and we get to the top and we win the big tournament, maybe we even dominate. When we get to that period in time, there's a big difference between the team who gets there like that and then falls off, not just because they become worse and they play worse Counter-Strike or Quake or StarCraft 2, whatever, but because the meta changes. First of all, the meta in terms of the game might shift, so you have to be good at different things. And then also the meta might change in terms of the opponents. That opponent that you beat before might have adapted to you. Maybe they even make a roster change to change in that sense. They work on something specially. They change their style, or a new team comes along that's got a style that, just as yours was the counter or couldn't be countered by the others and was the winning style against them, another team comes along with a style that's better than yours. And we've seen this countless times throughout history. The real champions either dominate, as in they get to the top initially like that, and even when these other factors happen, they find a way to stay at the top, or they can fall back down again, get beaten by someone better, but find a way to rise up and counter them, or reassert themselves as the best, or discover a new way to be the best. That quality, that aspect is different. That's something that defines the winning mentality as well. It's this notion that you're not just gonna play the game and just hope it goes well. You're going to adapt constantly. You're going to take what you're doing and not just say, right, it worked that time, it'll work again. Because it might work at the next tournament, it might work at the next 4 tournaments. But eventually, one day, it won't work. And in fact, one of the reasons it won't work is a function of the fact it did work. Because now everyone's focused on that as the thing that they're looking at. Like, to win, we're going to have to beat that. And we're going to have some answer to that. And we're going to have to maybe bring some of that into our team and figure out what we can do then, integrate some of it. Look for the obvious counters. This aspect is inherent within the early dominance of the great teams. You have to improve as well. You have to take certain areas where, because the meta is going to change in terms of teams and opponents and style, you might have to take an area where, listen, maybe I'm the strongest at this one aspect, but one day I'm going to meet someone where either that strength no longer is enough to make me win, or maybe they're even better at that strength. So now I have to either shore up my weaknesses or become strong in a new area, a new different way to be the strongest, which in itself is incredible when someone can do it. So another factor is, in the sense that they leave it up to nothing, is that when they're on top, they don't just sit on their roster and their laurels or just stick with what they have. Like, for example, if they get on top, but one of their weaknesses is their strategies aren't amazing. So I think of like Nip in CSGO. They're the best in terms of the team, best chemistry, best communication, but they don't have the best strategies. If you wait around, a team's going to come along with better strategies and match you in some of those other areas and take over. So Very Games did it in 2013. Now, in this sense, to get back on top again, you're going to have to tweak your strategies. You're going to have to start to fix that. You're going to have to shore up some of the weaknesses there so that then your strength can help you win. This is what these people were able to do. The aspect here is, some good players, or maybe even the odd great player who isn't like the greatest, they're almost willing, by just playing their own game, letting the opponent play his game and just seeing what happens, they're willing to let fate kind of control them. They're willing to just say, okay, I'll play my game, and did I win? Was it the right era? Nah, it wasn't. I tried my best. Maybe I came close. Okay, that's enough for me. I've won some titles. I didn't win this one. Not as big a deal for me. There's a degree to which I sometimes felt like Khan and his Fnatic teams were sometimes like that. They got, in a weird way, they were a bit accepting of it. Whereas the guys I like are the guys who, in a sense, are kind of tortured by not winning like that. This is what someone like GetRight's like. If he loses, even if he plays great in the final, he thinks to himself, like, there's something I could have done. There was still a round where if I'd made that move differently, or, you know what, I should have known when I watched the demo. Like, I saw it, but I did, like, the notion crossed my mind that they might do this, but I didn't really consider it enough. If I thought about it enough now, in hindsight, I can see that that's the approach they take. I can see that's what would happen. This kind of determination, this drive to do that, and to make it like that is kind of what makes it like there's a great, I've got some quotes here that I'm going to use to kind of illustrate some of these points, or maybe emphasize them would be a better way to say it. So there's a great quote by someone called Casey Stengel, and it said, "Most games are lost, not won." And whether that's actually accurate, like there are actually games where you play someone and they're in God mode. Like a great example would be Virtus Pro when they won EMS 1 Katowice in 2014 in March. Even if NiP had banned differently, they had have banned Mirage, and even if NiP had picked it up together on the second map and done, but I still don't know that they could have won that final, actually, because when you saw the final at the end of the tournament, yeah, Virtus Pro did play some insane Counter-Strike then. Maybe their level was just above, and in some of the Brood War finals, I think of, like, people like Stork when they played against Bisu in the MSL, he could have sort of won, but some of it was conclusive. Definitely Jaedong towards the end of the days when he's playing against Flash in like that last OSL final, he just couldn't have won that. Like Flash was just above and above it. In these days, it's not actually accurate. You can't actually do that. But the greatest players do have that mentality, because it means when they get to the game where actually there is something that was under their control, which, yeah, in the game, in the match itself, you might not be able to control it. It might be no time now to do it. But because you've been looking for holes, you've been looking for things in your opponent that you can improve and get better and maybe attack him in that way, because you don't settle for resting on your laurels and being where you are and saying, I'm good and I have a chance to win. You want to take away every factor of chance and have been prepared as you can. In that sense, you put it so that when you do get to those games where there is going to be that little bit of chance, it's going to be who's more prepared and who's done these things. Now, when you have that little 5% extra, that might be enough to make you win. So it's a great mentality to have in that sense. This was an aspect where, even though he lost, I mean, he made this guy, Peyton Manning, okay, in American football, made it to 3 NFL finals. He only won one of them against the weakest opponent. The other 2 he lost. The last one in spectacular fashion, lost to the Seahawks, even though he had this great offensive team and they were a great defensive team. Got utterly plowed. But one thing you can never take away from him is he prepared maybe more than anyone in the history of the NFL. He would watch every game, every pass over and over and over and analyze them. And even when he was winning, he threw the record amount of touchdowns that season and won all these games. Even when he's winning, he's still looking at, was there a way? Like, if I had thrown that pass, yes, it got through this time. But if I'd have thrown it a little bit better, a little bit further over, would it have been a catch where it couldn't have been stopped? If this guy had predicted the defender to get there a bit faster, maybe this one would have been the better version. He's looking to improve. Yes, in this sense, the example doesn't end with him winning, but it's that mentality. That is a winning mentality in its sense. Now, it happened to be on someone who lost and lost many times, but that is the winner's mentality. That is an aspect that you have to break down in that sense. Adapting, improving, not settling for anything less, not leaving things up to chance, being willing to change things all the time. Likewise, there's another, and so actually, when I thought of that quote, by the way, most games are lost, not won, I actually immediately thought of Freiburg when he played in the DreamHack Winter Final, this last one, 2014. And he was in championship point in regulation against LDLC, and they lost that. It went to overtime, and he lost in overtime. After the final, NiP, who'd brought in a new player before that was the first tournament with him, they weren't even expected to make the final. You'd think, like people like Forrest, you could be happy with it. You'd be like, okay, we lost, it sucks, but you know what, we had a great run, we had some magical matches, we almost won, like, oh, it was awesome. Freiburg had this tweet he made right after the match where he just said something along the lines of, like, you don't win a silver, you lose a gold. Now, people could think that's being negative, whatever. I can kind of respect that, though. That's basically a different way of phrasing this quote. Most games are lost, not won. In terms of this aspect of looking for faults, even in success and greatness, there's a quote from a guy called Don Schuller, which said, the superior man blames himself, the inferior man blames others. Now, this is a key area where you'll see the winning mentality contrasted against any other mentality. I won't just say a losing mentality, but anything less than the ideal winning mentality. Because I know great players who've made a lot of finals, who've made a lot of semi-finals, who've won big games, but when you talk to them about the losses and the close losses and the big finals they lost, they'll say stuff like, oh, well, you know, they anti-stratted us, and, you know, one of my teammates made this big mistake that cost us around there, and you know what, I think I played well, but you know, when I look at it, like, it was just a bad week for me, and my head wasn't in the right place, my girlfriend was, all that sort of thing. In the way that they're doing it there, in general, is trying to blame other things. Is trying to put the blame of losing and asking the question, why did I lose, and was there something I can change, and kind of going, there isn't, because of this reason, and so put it off to the side, don't think about it, just hope things go better. The greatest players, the greatest winners and champions are the guys who are locked in that sense. They look for every little thing. Like when I gave Get Right as an example there, I've really seen this, that Get Right actually, I've seen him win finals and be thinking to himself, like, I didn't play well enough in that final. And this might sound naive, like, oh, he's just getting attention for himself. Yeah, to a degree, but also it's because, like the Peyton Manning example there, there's been times when I know that part of it is that Get Right knew, okay, the way I played there, not as well as I could have, and I messed up these particular rounds. If this other teammate of mine misses a couple of kills there, or he doesn't come out at the right time there, or someone has miscommunicated something, that round changes. We lose that round. We maybe lose the whole game. And so now the rounds that I didn't win, the situations I fucked up, and the approach I had that was wrong, could have then cost us the game. That could have been the factor that could have won the game for us. So in a weird way, that's it. I can understand it. He doesn't, even when he wins, he doesn't accept failure in this sense. And that's what will always push him to be a great player, one of the greatest of all time. And in the early days of CSGO, he was always the best player, tournament after tournament after tournament, because he didn't rest on his laurels this way. He didn't just settle back and have a close loss and go, whew, glad we won that one, guys. That probably won't happen again. Let's just hope it doesn't. No, you don't allow it to happen again. And this is the thing. There's an aspect. I made this point in my video about the StarCraft 2 one, about the guys who won the silvers. There's a problem that people who aren't champions, who haven't been very successful, have, where they think to themselves, and even players, by the way, who've never won the big one, think this. They think, no matter how many times I've lost, if I just won it once, that's enough for me. I'm not greedy. I don't want more than that. If I just win once, I'll enjoy it. And you know what? Who cares if I lose after that? I'm a champion. I did it. No, the greatest players understand this core concept of life itself, which is that you can only live one day at a time. It doesn't matter if for the last 7 days, the last 7 finals, you won, you did your best, you succeeded, everything went great. If tomorrow you wake up, you have to only live tomorrow. That's the only day that's going to be there. It's going to be today at the time, obviously. That's the only day you can live. And so on this day, if you lose, you lost on that day. It doesn't matter what happened yesterday. It doesn't matter what happened tomorrow. You had to try and win on that day. And so the greatest players are the ones where they have that mentality. They break it down. Not only they're studying the details of their craft, but in this sense as well, every day they're trying to win. If they know every final they get to, it doesn't matter if they've won 17 finals. If in the 18th final they know they have a chance to win, they're in the game, they have moments where they're close to winning that, beating that guy, they're not ever going to afterwards say, oh, it doesn't matter that I lost that one. They're going to be like, I should have won that. I could have. I was there. Like, fuck all those other titles. I wanted that one. That's the one that I had to win and I lost it. Fuck. And they're going to obsess over it. The greatest players. There's a great quote I once heard. Doug Collins, the guy who was the coach of Michael Jordan, his second coach during the late 80s, and then it was when Phil Jackson took over that they won all the titles. So he kind of saw Michael Jordan just before Michael Jordan became the god, when he was already at an incredibly high level, but he hadn't quite fully crafted his game and hadn't got the right team and coach around him. And he once said, greatness, talking about like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, these sorts of people, he said, greatness is greedy. It's the idea that even when you're amazing and you can exert this effort, you always want more. You're reaching for more. You never allow everything just to be in your grasp. You're reaching for the next thing. You're pushing yourself, forcing yourself to improve. So you think of like Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant, okay, has won 5 NBA titles and was in 7 finals. Now, listen, if you look at the 2010 finals that they won in narrowly in Game 7, some people would say they maybe should only have 4 titles. Hey, 2002, they lost to they just narrowly in kind of a bullshit series beat the Kings and maybe could have lost that. So hey, maybe they could be down only 3 titles now out of 7 finals. But he looks at it and he says, I should have had 6 at least. I should have beaten Celtics in 2008. And you know what? If Karl Malone doesn't get injured in 2004, maybe I win that one. There's 6 out of the 7. This is the mentality. You can't accept these failures because you know a lot of these failures are to do with things that you yourself could have improved and can improve. And now that you've seen the failure, you start work on it. You go for the next one. And actually what happens is that's why they win so many times. It's not just that they're thinking and they're greedy about it. It's that If they'd have rested on their laurels, maybe they would have only won the 1 or 2 titles early on. They wouldn't, at the end, when they're playing in 6th or 7th finals like Michael Jordan, Kobe, etc., they wouldn't still be going so hard. Maybe they're hardest in these last ones to win if they were people who just settled back. Even when they're on top, the reason these people can repeat as champion is they know next year other people are going to be prepared. They're going to be gunning for me. They're going to come in super hard. Maybe my defeat of them will even spur them on to be even more driven to do it, and they'll improve even more. So I have to improve more. I have to short my weaknesses. I have to develop my game, make it more efficient, more deadly, more consciously thought out, more intuitively brilliant. They know this. A guy, Larry Bird, won 3 NBA titles, but because he played in something like, let me think, I think he played in 5 finals. He's haunted by the losses in the finals. He lost to the Lakers in 2 finals. He's haunted by these. He thinks back and he thinks that should have gone differently, and we had a great team that year. It didn't work out, and this injury got there. It haunts him, and that's why he's so great and why he was able to get to that level. Another sports example for you, and I'll go into some gaming examples next. George St Pierre, the guy who won the most, he had the most title defenses at welterweight in the UFC. Part of what made him amazing was, first of all, athletically, yeah, he's a freak. He's incredible in terms of abilities, but he made himself the most well-rounded fighter, and he learned in terms of how to game plan so that for every opponent, he would be fully into practicing for that one guy as much as he could, that he would be able to figure out a way to shut that guy's game down. He wouldn't just be the best George St Pierre and do what he can do best in his strengths. He would figure out how to work on his weaknesses to the extent that whatever his opponent was going to do, he could shut it down and neutralize him and then beat him using his strengths, like wrestling, just boxing, but like point fighting, not like straight up trying to knock people out. He could use these strengths and stamina to be able to go all the rounds. He could use these strengths and destroy the opponent on the opponent's weaknesses. He could do this. It's incredible. And because he was greedy for this greatness, to be the best of all time, between fights, other people, okay, in MMA, take time off and they rest and then they figure out when the next fight is and they figure out how they're going to ramp up. He never would. He would be training all the time. Even though he's someone who naturally, to some degree, would want to be lazy, he knew that to be the greatest, he had to keep in perfect shape. He had to start looking for new things to do. He started learning fucking like acrobatics. He started asking stuff, like he asked like Joe Rogan, this comedian who used to be a Taekwondo champion in America, like, how do I do this particular spinning back kick from Taekwondo? That's not even usually a kick people fucking use in MMA. It's like very rarely used. He started trying to adopt his arsenal, figure out new ways to be brilliant. To give you a basketball example, I know that Kobe Bryant has studied all these different areas that have nothing to do with basketball. Like supposedly he was watching like a nature documentary and he saw that some sort of animal, I can't even remember what animal it was. I think it was like a fucking panther or something, or something like a jaguar. When it runs, apparently its tail will sort of lean the other way to the side that it's like leaning at. Like its tail will like lean this way. If it's leaning left, its tail will lean right. And in a way, it provides an aspect of balance. So what he did was he looked at his jump shot, which was his bread and butter, 2-point jump shots about 12 feet. That's where he goes to work. He's one of the best in the NBA of all time. Since that's what he's going to be doing the whole time, and he would often be taking these off balance because he'd have to be fading away, like fading backwards or leaning back. He learned to balance his leg in a countervailing way like that. He tried to apply the dynamic he'd learned from a fucking animal's movement, naturally how it's set up to work, and apply it to his jump shot to make his jump shot more efficient, smoother, so that if you looked at his 2-point percentages in terms of true shooting, they were up there like, what, I can't remember what it was, like 55% or something really excellent. And this aspect he applied to his game. He was already one of the greatest players, already a 3-time champion, but he added this to his game. He wanted to get better in some way that his opponents aren't thinking of, so he's going to have an advantage on them. He's going to gain up to people who are better than him at the time. This is greatness for you. In terms of StarCraft, let's go into that. Jaedong, the Brewdor master. This was a guy who year on year was able to pick up titles, go to finals, get better, have people come up who were rivals, and he would beat them down and find a way to defeat, find a way to beat Bisu, find a way to beat Jaedong, find a way to beat Flash, find a way to beat Stork. And yeah, at the end he lost to Flash, who turned out to be the best player ever. But even then he gave him some battles, and even then he got to finals. And even in his worst year, he got to 4 finals and won one of them against the greatest player of all time. Like, this is the winning mentality, to never give up, to never say like, I've won now, that's enough, I'll stay at that, what I'm doing is good enough. That meant, you know, the mentality of the people have is, all I have to do is think about myself, don't think about my opponent. No, the great player thinks about himself and the opponent. He's thinking about both and all at the same time, and he's going to do anything it takes to stay on top. If you think about in Counter-Strike, I'll give you a great example there, which is Potty. The reason why Potty is one of the greatest, one of the top 3 players of all time, 1.6, is not skill. He was incredibly skilled, but in terms of pure skill, raw aiming, like ability to use the weapons, just dominance in the game, on, like just skill wise, he's top 10, but he wouldn't probably be top 3 or 4, maybe even not top 5. But in terms of best players of all time, he's top 3 because he got the most out of his skill. He used technique and application and practice and thought and determination to become one of the greatest winners and players ever. And he was clutch, and he knew, and he had that resolute quality that could not be broken. You could not defeat him. And he had a key mentality where, because he won, he had like 9 tournaments he won that were like CPLs and stuff, and he placed in the top 4 of like 10 or something. Part of the reason why he was so legendary is I remember one tournament, CPL Winter 2002, and in this final, after winning all these CPLs and placing in the top X or whatever, in this tournament he finished 3rd. And when he finished 3rd, I've seen so many winners' ceremonies with the 3 teams getting the checks, and you have those teams who are like maybe the 6th best team, but they have a good run and they finish 3rd. They're all smiling, hey, we finished 3rd overall, like, yeah, we lost, like, I wish we could have gone further, but we finished 2nd. Sometimes you see a team finish 2nd who, they had a good run, they know they're not the best, but they played well, it's close, whatever, we're 2nd, hey, it's cool. I saw Potty came 3rd here, and he had a look on his face like you'd murdered his dog right in front of him. Like he couldn't believe it, and what is wrong, and he was disgusted with himself and his team, and they cut some players from that team right after that tournament, despite the fact they finished 3rd with a brand new lineup that only 2 weeks before something they take some of these players in. That was not going to stand, the 3rd place there. And if there's anything he could do, whether it was replacing teammates or working on his own game, he was going to do it. And that's why he became the champion again after that and had the most dominant year ever the year afterwards, where he dominated with SK Sweden. Because he wasn't going to accept that. He was going to do whatever, he wasn't going to leave anything up to chance. He was going to question everything about his own actions, his own level, his teammates, the kind of opponent he was playing, the approach he was taking, his mental approach when he was playing against them. Was he kind of taking too much time out of the game? Was the girl problems? Whatever it took, he was going to find a way to win, and that's why he won. That's why he's a champion. That's why greatness is greedy. It is greedy in this sense. You are saying, I want to win over anything. There's a lot of people, here's a great line for you. A lot of people have heard, I've always thought in sports especially, this has ruined it, because a lot of great sportsmen or talented sports athletes grew up watching like Michael Jordan or Muhammad Ali, and they heard kind of the vernacular of how a champion talks, like, oh, championship's all that matters to me, you know, 2nd place is just first loser, it doesn't matter unless I win. Like, you get people now who are athletes who are on the worst team and they're like, well, our goal is to win the championship. Like, fuck off, it isn't. You have no chance to do that. Your realistic goal is maybe to get in the playoffs. That'd be cool if you could do that. You have no chance to win. You can say it's a goal, but then I look at your life, you're not living it as if you're a goal. People, everyone who's a competitor in esports especially, says they want to win. They say their ultimate goal, my dream is to win the World Championship. I'm doing everything I can. That's my dream. I'm working towards it all the time, working my hardest. But you actually look at what they're doing and they're not. Their lifestyle, beyond their words, their actions betray that they don't want to win above everything. They're not willing to give everything up to win. Because what you find out is that when there's a certain kind of team on their team who's annoying them or whatever, then they don't want to practice as much. And then they cut someone who was a great player for their team, but they didn't get along with him. It was too much arguing, and I'd rather have someone who's a friend of mine. And then they lose a big series, and it disheartens them, and they take time off, and they say, oh, I'll come back later. Or they don't improve the area that they could. They go, oh, it was good enough, and I'll win next time. Or they win, and they don't improve and adapt beyond that. And what you find out is, if you really were to reformulate their statement to be accurate to their life and reflect it, it would say, I want to win as long as it's on my terms and in a manner that doesn't make me uncomfortable in any sense. Now, the greatest players ever, it's different from that. They're willing to give up everything to win. Some of them, who are at a borderline sociopathic level, if not literally, are willing to even have people in their team hate them, to be actually mean in the way they approach their opponents, trying to destroy their opponent mentally, because they really are willing to do anything to win, anything. Kobe Bryant, after he'd already won his 5th championship, then dropped something like a season later. I think it was like 1 or 2 seasons later. I think it was 2 seasons later, 2012. He then went on a special diet, like one of these like super duper diets where like you're gluten free or some shit. I can't remember what it was, and then dropped like 10 or 20 pounds just because he knew since he was older and there'd be more like wear on his knees, he had to be in even better shape. He had to be in peak shape. Even though he was one of the best athletes in the world, he had to have even more stamina. He had to be a bit leaner. He had to be a bit, because he has to make up for the lack of speed as he's getting older. Even as a great player, he's finding a way where, like, you know what, no matter what it takes to win, I'm going to find out a way. If I find something I'm not doing, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do that to win. That's what the great players do. So if we talk about players who are clutch and who seem to have this aspect where they do seem to, the reason winning follows them around, they seem lucky in a sense, is because they've got this greatness around them. I'll give you a few. These are going to be mainly Counter-Strike examples here, because I've already touched on some other ones like fucking StarCraft and all the rest of it, and I could do about Quake, but I'll use Counter-Strike for these ones just to keep a theme, okay? Shox has to be one, because there's been very few finals Shox has played in where he's actually lost. Yes, he lost a few to Fnatic at the end of 2013, but he's played NiP in 5 finals, and he's won all 5 finals, including a major final. He's won tons and tons of tournaments. He's one of the most winningest players ever in terms... Beyond NiP, who won the most, he's like right up there in the next category. Great player, very clutch player, awesome player. Exist. Okay, so of the NiP players, Exist is one of them. Now, Exist doesn't have the talent to exert game impact and win every game. He can't be in every final and win it. He can't do that. And he's had finals that weren't that good. But in terms of his skill set, what he does have, he can be clutch in the sense that he can get the most out of it in a lot of big games and big finals. That's why he wins those 1v2s. That's why he has that determination, that fire to keep going. Now then, he doesn't always live up to they'll do anything, because he kind of sticks with the same strats and depends on great players to get him there and to do the killing. That's true, but just for his heart, I'll give him the category there. Now, a great player in CS, Get Right. Get Right has broken down in finals. He's got a history of it in 1.6 and in CSGO. But that's also because Get Right's a massive overachiever. If you knew who Get Right was as a person, people would fucking kiss the ground this guy walks in. He's not Forrest. He's not Neo. He's not that talent level. He is very talented. He's like a top... To me, Get Right's someone who, just in terms of raw talent and skill, should have been like maybe a top 20 player. Like he'd be in the 10 to 20 part, and he'd have been in some good teams. He'd been in like an SK type team. He'd win a few tournaments. He'd have some top 4s. He'd be thought of more of like around the level of a Face, that sort of a guy. Or let me think who else we're thinking of. Maybe around the level of Zonic, like accomplishing some great things, a lot of seconds, thirds. Not the greatest player ever, though. Instead, he is one of the top 5 top 5, definitely top 10, maybe even top 5 elevation of where he is as a great player of all time, because he's done everything he can do in his power to get to this level. He's clutch beyond that because he has the courage to believe that he can succeed in scenarios where he shouldn't be able to. That's why he could win those impossible 1v4s in the early days of CSGO, and why he was dominating every tournament. And even after his problems in 1.6, he was able to become the best champion ever in CSGO. This guy has it all for a star player. You can talk about balls and determination, courage. Get Right has it all. As weird as it sounds, I'm going to give another name for NiP, even though NiP have lost a lot of these major finals. Because here's a guy where he's another one who doesn't have the raw talent, where he can't just win every game like Shox could at his peak in very games. Freiburg, in his own way, first of all, I mentioned because of the mentality before, the mentality shines through. But in each final, he'll have a couple of big rounds where he really does just take over for that one round. Now, he can't always win, and it is a bit of bullshit to have too many NiP players here, so I do have issues with that slightly. But I think he has something to him in that sense. Crims for Fnatic. Fnatic's worst, like, okay, it'll sound on paper like their worst performance, okay, was DreamHack Winter, which technically, remember, they technically won, but whatever, they got relegated in the round of 8. That's their worst performance technically, but they did lose to the eventual champions. MLG X Games Aspen was really their worst placing out of this run since they became dominant, and they finished 4th place. Yet in the semi-final against NiP, Crims was the best player on almost every map. In the 3rd place game against Dignitas, he was the best player in every single map, and yet his team only won 2 out of these, let me think, 2 out of 6 maps that they played. He was incredibly clutch, not in as much as he wins 1v1s, but in as much as having game impact every round, consistently, round after round after round, average damage really high, round after round after round, map after map, half after half. His level of clutch and winning mentality, and by the way, here's the thing, when Flusher shit the bed massively at that MLG tournament and was really the reason they lost to NiP, well, one of the X factors, obviously NiP played great, but that was the X factor on the Fnatic side. Crims wasn't the guy who was like, oh fuck, if Flusher hadn't fucked up, like I did great, but if Flusher hadn't done that, instead he was sort of like, oh, we lost, like what could we do differently, like could I have done something differently? He had that winning mentality, it was there. Now let's talk about some players to keep it on Counter-Strike, to keep the theme. Let's talk about some who, and by the way, if you're a StarCraft person, I hope you just tune out Edge. If you don't care about Counter-Strike, that is. In terms of people who don't really have it and who maybe don't have the winning mentality in some sense, some of these names might surprise you, but I'll give it because to give the other side of the spectrum, to show the disparity. So 2 players in NiP don't have the winning mentality. So one of them is obviously Fiflaren. Now this sounds weird because in a weird way, Fiflaren's actual talent level, he did get a lot out of it, but I don't know whether he had the selfishness to be a great player in that sense. I think he was willing to give up too much and to compromise too much. And in these scenarios, he was a guy to a degree where there was a part of him could sort of settle for not winning sometimes. Like he did do a lot and he did do great. And yeah, this guy didn't do quite as well as he could here. And I feel like there was a part of him wasn't quite as great in that sense. He was one of the guys who was off there. And the big name on their team that didn't do it was Forrest. Because in terms of skill, Forrest, if he wants to, well, I don't know if he could if he wants to, because his mentality isn't there. If your whole mental frame is different, you can't get the most out of your game. But just in terms of skill set, if I could put Get Right's heart into Forrest's body, I would have the best player ever who might dominate every single tournament he ever played in. So that's not even ridiculous. It sounds like a ridiculous exaggeration. It almost isn't. That's what we're talking about. If you had the skill set available to Get Right with his mentality and his drive, which again, maybe he wouldn't develop that drive, etc. If he didn't have a slightly weaker game. That's a very valid point. I could maybe make my own video about. But if you could put them in there, it would be there. Instead, Forrest had all these massive failures where compared to his talent, actually, he's gotten a lot of it, but not as much as he can. There's a decent chapter, there's a decent amount of trophies he left on the table and let someone else take from him. That he could have taken from them if he'd have really done everything in his power. Like you can't deny that. He just didn't have that same motivation. Like he didn't have the killer instinct. He didn't have the winning mentality in this sense. He was willing to win as long as it was on his terms. That's Forrest. Taz has to be one, which sounds weird because in 1.6 he won fuck tons of tournaments with the best player ever. But in CSGO, when I look at the tournaments that Virtus Pro has lost in 2014, I look at them and I see that actually even the times they won, so the big tournament they won, EMS won Katowice, Taz played like actual shit in that final, was really bad. I can't, he could have played identically. Someone else could have played slightly worse and they might have lost that final. Then you look at some of the other tournaments and oftentimes he's had some of the problems. He's had some issues in CSGO for some reason with pressure. He's not been able to have it. And in terms of winning mentality, I don't know that he has improved his own game. Because when I see what he was in 1.6, I think he could be better individually in CSGO. But I think he settles back on this idea that since he's like got a leadership role and since he has other skilled players on his team, he doesn't have to do it that much. I don't think he takes as much responsibility. The last three names are all going to be within the French scene. So one of them is Belgian, it's Scream. Now Scream, again, he's up there with the Forrest thing. His talent level, very high. Not as high as Forrest, but close to it in terms of just aiming. Definitely one of the best aimers ever. And yet, even when Very Games was winning all those tournaments at the end of 2013, he was the guy who actually didn't often show up that great in those big winning tournaments. And he would have a great game at one point in the tournament, but then in the big match, in the big semi or the big final, he would kind of slump away and he wouldn't be that great, actually. He never really was as good as he could have been, even in their best teams. The last two names are both French. Smiths. Smiths, for me, if I look at Very Games when they lost to NIP, and I look at LDLC when they lost to Fnatic, and now I look at Envy when they lost to Fnatic, and even Envy when they won those two tournaments, when they won the DreamHack Winters LDLC and they won MLG, the one factor throughout all of these of the player who's playing the worst on average overall and who's having below par performances for himself and is sometimes just choking a lot, it's always Smiths for me. Unfortunately, listen, I don't dislike him as a person, and I think for his skill set there are times in the game where he can get the most out of it, but I just can't help but see that he doesn't have the winning mentality like that. I think he's the guy where he seems super emo. He seems almost sometimes before these games like he feels like he kind of almost knows they're going to lose. He has a bad feeling about it. When you look at him when he loses around, he's not the guy who seems to pick himself up, who seems to have like that fortitude, seems to crumble a bit. For me, he was the main player who had the losing factor. He wasn't. The team lost as a team and they had the wrong approach sometimes and didn't have certain star players like Scream. Someone didn't have Perform or Kenny S early on, but he certainly had massive issues, the most, I think, of any of the people on this list. And the last name is going to be a very strange one, NBK, because I don't mean NBK when he played Very Games in Titan. Now, listen, he didn't have some good games when Titan bombed their majors, but in Very Games, he was one of the best. He was one of the most clutch on their team. But in LDLC, and going into Envy now, he's had some tournaments where he picked it up. He'd have a map where he'd do really well, but he was the one who really did cost them when they were playing the ESWC final, the Fragbite Masters final. He really was doing quite poorly in those ones. And I've just noticed he seems almost to have that Smiths mentality now where he's just worried that they won't win or he doesn't know if it's going to happen. He's hoping it'll go well. He doesn't have the killer winning mentality that this video is talking about. And I wonder, does he leave anything up to chance? Does he keep battling in this sense? Does he find a way even to improve it, to get confidence, to find something internally that you can get? You don't have to get external confidence always from, well, my team's playing great and he's playing great. You have to find something inside yourself that says, I can win, I should win, I deserve to win, I'm gonna win, no matter what. That's the winning mentality. So it's mainly been CS orientated, but I did have some sports and some other games there. I think it's an interesting topic. You could talk a lot about different factors that go into this, but to me, the winning mentality, you can see when by how a player wins and what happens in those finals if he has that mentality, not just if he wins or loses.